Evening, everybody, and welcome to the PMI Victorian History Library Cinema. Welcome. I'm Judith. I'm the Library President and Chair of the Board, and a very warm welcome to our speaker tonight, Mike Trickett, who I'm sure many of you already know or have seen before, but I'll introduce Mike a bit more later. Also, I'd like to thank Stonington City Council for its sponsorship of our refreshments tonight. I hope you've got your lolly bag and your popcorn and your ice cream. And of course, there's coffee and tea in the corner there, which you can pop up and get any time or afterwards. Our library is located on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to elders both past and present. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Our facilities, bathrooms are effectively on the other side of this wall. You can go through this door, turn left, and they're there, or back out through the main door and do a U-turn, and they're just on the other side of the wall there. In the event of an emergency, we have two exits. One is back out through the main door where you came in and downstairs, and the other one is through this door here to the end of the corridor. And in the event of an emergency, our staff will make sure that you exit safely. We were established in 1854. We had our 170th birthday last year, and we're the second oldest public library in Victoria. We've got a collection of well over 40,000 items in all sorts of different media, and we take great pride in being the sole library in Australia with such an extensive collection that's actually available for loan. And our focus is very much on local history. We've got tons of information encompassing most towns throughout Victoria. And the exhibition on the walls of this room gives you a bit of the history of the library. And we also have some exhibits in our glass case at the bottom there from CATHS, and a few little things also at the back, and some books from the library about cinema, and some books for sale too on the counter, on the table over on that wall. So make sure you have a look at that after if you haven't already. We're taking video for our YouTube channel tonight in photographs. Ellen's doing that for us. Thank you, Ellen. If you prefer not to be in any sort of photograph or video, let us know and we can accommodate that. So welcome to Mike Trickett, who is the Secretary of the Cinema and Theatre Historical Society, or CATHS as we commonly call it. It's based here in our library, so up this corridor and in the next door. And CATHS preserves and collects anything relating to Australian cinemas and theatres. The Society has regular meetings and has guest speakers and on-screen presentations as well. And I see from your website, you say you can actually come along for a try and see if you like it and see if you'd like to join. It's not expensive, so hop on the website or have a word to Mike, have a look at the brochures down there if you're interested. And it has an extensive collection, of course, for research. So chat with Mike afterwards to find out more about CATHS. And tonight he's going to take us on a whirlwind adventure through Victoria's early contribution to cinema history. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you very much. And a very good evening to everyone. I'd just like to say how pleased we are to be a small part of PMI here. We've got our archive, as Judith said, next door. And we're very, very pleased to be part of the PMI family. Well, tonight I thought we'd take a look at the important part Melbourne played in the production and exhibition of early films in Australia. Australia was at the forefront of film production in the early days of cinema, or as most people called them in those days, the pictures or the flicks. Melbourne was very much involved, as we shall see. Melbourne's first included the first film screening in Australia and probably the Southern Hemisphere, and the first feature-length film to be produced and screened. So we have a very rich culture here for film. But first, a little bit of cinema history. The first public screening of to a paying audience of about 40 people took place in Paris in 28th of December 1895. These two fellows here, the Lumiere brothers, Auguste and Louis, they were the makers of a combined camera and projector called the cinematograph. This was a very well constructed and very thought out little device because it combined the actions of a camera, a film printer and a projector all in the one box, which made it very, very useful for a variety of things, as we'll see shortly. They started producing small experimental films. And this is the machine that they used for that purpose. And it could be adapted and used for exhibition as well. This is the first, or one of the first films they produced. And it's very, very simple. But when you consider this was the very early days, and this was what they had 40 people view at a cinema. Now, I'm told and read in various publications that people actually screamed, yelled, and fled the cinema or theatre when it was held, because take into account, nobody had ever seen anything like this before. This was a moving image on a screen. It was a train coming at them, and even though it was in black and white, it still presented a fairly realistic scene to them. They also produced another film, which is this one here, which I think is called The Man with the Hose or something similar. Now, these are all very simplistic, and of course, as you can see, it turns into a little bit of a comedy. Now, I'm led to believe that that was the first film that used actors and a script such as it was. And it was something which went on to bigger and better things, of course. Now, at this time, you might ask what happened to Edison, because we all know he was deeply involved as well. Edison had some strange ideas. He felt that by having films available in a view unit such as that, which is called a kinetoscope, and you had to pay a nickel, 5 cents, to be able to view the film. And he thought he could make a lot more money when everybody had to pay to watch the film individually. So he had salons set up with many of these machines. People all paid to watch, but it was not on a big screen, and certainly not the way in which we envisage movies today. So, back to Melbourne. Change my page. Right, the first screening in Australia. Carl Hertz, an American who was living in London and was some sort of a magician, managed to acquire a projector. This is Carl, and he set it up and projected a couple of films in the Opera House, the Melbourne Opera House, which later became the Tivoli Theatre. Uh-oh.
Hang on. That's all right, it's just on the screen. Yeah, that is possible.
So Carl had a projector which was made in England by English inventor Robert W. Paul, He also brought with him 5 short films, which they screened at the Opera House, and that was the first presentation of motion pictures in Australia and probably the Southern Hemisphere. Now, the Lumiere films, in the same year, the Lumiere company decided to send cameramen to various parts of the world to capture scenes for exhibition back in Europe. One of those cameramen, Maurice Sestier, came to Australia in 1896, and he got here just before the Melbourne Cup of that year, so he arrived just in time to film the 1896 Melbourne Cup. There seems to be more of the crowd than there is of the horses.
It's fashion.
It's still the same, isn't it?
Of course, filming the crowd became a very big thing in the early days because there were quite a number of cameramen that would go around to various small towns, get people out on the street, even get them to act small stories, and they would screen it at the theatre, and of course everybody wanted to see themselves on the big screen, so it was a good money maker. I think this might have been as well. This film did the rounds of the country for the next 12 months. We've got in our records information about it being screened in places like Broken Hill and many other areas, even up to 12 months after the event. So it was certainly, it did the rounds and obviously made quite a lot of money. Right, so there you go.
One small part of that.
Now, the Salvation Army, they played a very important part in filmmaking and exhibition in Melbourne. In the late 1880s, the Salvation Army found that projecting slides to illustrate their talks was a powerful aid to getting their message across. Eventually, they set up what they called the Limelight Department. It was located in their Bourke Street, Melbourne headquarters. It was under the direction of Captain Joseph Perry. The main purpose at that time was to produce colour slides to be used in their lectures. However, in 1897, Joe Perry was authorised to purchase a motion picture projector. He chose an English-made wrench, which could be used as a camera for making films. The cost was a whole 12 guineas, which today is about $2,500. The production was so successful, they eventually moved into purpose-made facilities in the attic of that building, which is still there today, and it's available for tours if you have any interest in that. In 1900, the Salvation Army made what we would call today a multimedia presentation. It was called Soldiers of the Cross. Over the years, it has been mistakenly referred to as a feature film, which it wasn't. It consisted of a series of colour slides, as you see on the screen, live lectures and some short 1-minute film sequences, some of which were made here in Melbourne, and they were supplemented by some French pathé material. And one of the locations mentioned for the production of the Melbourne films was the Kooyong tennis courts. These are believed to be some of the original slides of Soldiers of the Cross on exhibition at the Salvation Army building. The Salvos went on to produce many films over the next 10 or so years, many of them promoting their way of life and, of course, condemning the demon drink. With the success of the Salvos had in filming activities, they eventually purchased more equipment. In 1901, they had 2 Lumiere cameras and had access to others. This made them the best equipped of any film organisation in Australia, and they were located right here in Melbourne. So they were contracted to produce what was to become one of Australia's most historically significant films, the 1901 film of the inauguration of the Commonwealth of Australia. It was what we'd probably consider a newsreel today, and it is the only filmed record of that historic occasion. Bearing in mind that the cameras in use would only accept 100 feet of film, giving a runtime of about 1 minute, they managed to capture the event using multiple cameras and reloading. This is the film. Very poor quality, I'm afraid, which annoys me tremendously as a film collector, because it's a very significant film and you just cannot get a decent copy of it. Unfortunately, there's no narration of it, and you just got to guess what's happening. That would appear to be the signing of the inauguration documents, I guess. Following the success of the inauguration film, which of course was widely shown around the country, government and other work flowed to the Salvos following the success of that film. But around 1910, a new commissioner, James Hay, arrived from London. He apparently believed that filmmaking was a tool of the devil and that the Salvation Army should not be associated with it. He quickly closed down the Limelight department, and Joe Perry left the army to join a private film company. The financial fallout for the army was substantial because they had lost a very important source of revenue. But I guess James Hay was happy with his decision. Now, the world's first feature film, the story of the Kelly Gang. On Boxing Day 1906, the story of the Kelly Gang opened at the Athenaeum Theatre in Melbourne. This was the first multi-reel feature-length film. It had a runtime of approximately 1 hour. It is now recognised as the world's first feature film, and it was made right here in Melbourne. Unfortunately, only parts of it remain, some of which have deteriorated badly due to nitrate decomposition. These early films were filmed on a film type called nitrate, which is highly flammable, but stored under good conditions, it will last a very long time. I still have a 1906 original print of the Life of Christ in my collection, and it still runs through a projector today as good as it did when it was made. So if they're stored properly and looked after, they can last a long time. This seems to be quite a major production. There's quite a lot of cast involved in it, and although we only have fragments of it left, gives you a pretty fair idea of the quality of the production. Now, the Kelly film was made here in Melbourne by the Tate brothers, Charles, Frank and John. Some of the sequences were filmed at the Rosanna railway station, and other sequences were filmed at St Kilda, Eltham, Greensborough and Mitcham. Don't ask me which sequences because I wouldn't have a clue. This one obviously in the bush somewhere, but in those days I guess the bush might have been at Eltham. This is the decomposition which has occurred to some sections of the film. As you can see, it's virtually useless. Hopefully somewhere, sometime, I might find a better copy of it. There were quite a number of copies made apparently. Now, in the teen years, there were numerous films made here. In fact, it is recorded that in 1911, Australia produced more films than any other country on earth. And during the teen years, bush range of films became very popular. So much so that most states imposed a censorship, as it was thought they would corrupt the public morals. The police were also very unhappy with a number of films because, as we've seen in numerous films over the years, particularly the Charlie Chaplins and what have you from the 1920s, the police were always the ones that were mocked in the films, and there was no difference here. In the teen years, that was pretty much the same. So the local copper was not real happy to see other coppers on the screen being made fools of. So censorship became quite a big thing. And that is one of the problems that occurred with this particular film. Being silent, it had intertitles to explain the action. The subtitles were rather unique, being written in the slang of the day. There's a sort of example. It received good reports in England and in New Zealand, but it was withdrawn from distribution in the US because audiences couldn't understand the Australian slang. I guess the Americans would have struggled with terms like, I dips me lid, meaning take it out, I guess, and other Australianisms that were used throughout the film. An interesting little story about this film. As I mentioned before, due to censorship and other reasons, films often get chopped up. Some scenes are removed just simply to reduce the running time by unscrupulous exhibitors. If the film ran for an hour and they wanted to knock off early, well, it was one way of reducing the runtime. And the interesting little story is that a few years ago, the only copy the National Film and Sound Archive had a few minutes missing. I was talking to Ray Edmondson, the former curator of the NFSA, a few years ago, and he was telling me that he visited Eastman House in the US. Eastman House have a very extensive film archive, and also the UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles Film Archive, and was looking at their films they couldn't identify. And he found amongst the unknowns a film with the title of The Sentimental Blonde. It was written on the can, and yes, it was a full-length copy of The Sentimental Bloke, withdrawn from circulation because the Americans couldn't understand the subtitles. So there's interesting stories there. During the 1920s, up until the introduction of sound films, about 100 silent features were produced in Australia. Regrettably, less than half of them survived. Again, during the 1920s, the Kelly Gang and the Bush range of films were very popular. But homegrown stories like On Our Selection, the Dad Rudd films by Steele Rudd, they were very popular, so popular that film was remade a number of times, a sound version in 1932 and again in 1990. I think I've skipped over something here, but anyway, I'll keep going. So in the course of what we say a silent film, they were never really silent. They just had no speech. In nearly every instance, a film would be accompanied by music and sound effects, from a full orchestra to, in the large cinemas, maybe a single piano in the small venues. So it was a case of not really being silent, although we call them silent films. Now, the introduction of sound films. Is that sound?
Sound on cylinder, sound on disc, sound on film. Vitaphone, chromophone, kinetophone, deforest film, triangle, and in Australia, ostrotone, standard tone, sinusound, and ring. In Australia, some producers massively with sound on disc until 1931. The sound was reproduced from 16-inch records linked mechanically to the projector. Synchronization was proper. One breaking the film, one accidental bump that was lost. Systems using a soundtrack printed on the edge of the film eventually superseded.
Now that's an illustration of sound on film. I don't know, the sound was very low. Is it possible to make it a little
I
bit
can
louder?
turn it up.
We had it down because we were testing it on the later clips, which are much louder. So, right, just turn it up a little bit. No, it's full there. Hang on.
Skip low before it gets to now.
Okay. Crave, can you try it on the board, please?
Try it now.
You go back on the spot.
How far do you want to go back to that there?
Yeah,
A little further in?
touch. Right, that's it.
So try that one again.
Ah, it's the mouse on the bottom left. It's got to cross through the speaker.
No, that's
No.
no, it's a repeat button.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Okay. Right, so in
Turning it up manually.
where are we? Sorry about that. Somehow it skipped a bit of information. In 1928, the film industry was turned on its head when a film called The Jazz Singer was released. In Australia, it was first screened in Sydney, and the second screening was in February 1929 when it premiered at the Athenaeum Theatre. Now, many theatres tried to ignore sound films, but the public wanted more, so it was logical Australia would follow suit.
Talking figures did disappear.
Now, this should have sound.
Yeah. Is that loud enough?
Experiments were not figures. Sound on cylinder, sound on disc, sound on film. Vitaphone, chromophone, kinetophone, deforest film, triangle, and in Australia, ostrotone, standard tone, sinusound, and ring. In Australia, some producers massively with sound on disc till 1931. The sound was reproduced from 16-inch records linked mechanically to the projector. Synchronization was proper. One breaking the film, one accidental bump that was lost. Systems.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah, that's the problem.
turns the wrong one up. What the narration was attempting to say there is that Australia was very much advanced with the production of sound films and the equipment required to make them. There were a number of studios. You saw some images there. Rakophone was one of the prominent companies in Australia that manufactured sound equipment. And the early systems was sound on disc. Now, sound on disc was I use the term Mickey Mouse. I don't know if that's appropriate, but here we see a sound on disc system. Now, the image was on the film and the sound was on the disc. So they had to be run in synchronism. So one knock or vibration and it would jump tracks, and of course you'd have people talking when there was nothing, and then you'd have this sort of thing and no voice. So it was not a very satisfactory system, but that was the system that Warner Brothers used for The Jazz Singer. And it was the first type of sound that was used here in Australia. There we go. Now we've done that. Sound was on a disc, a 12-inch disc, which ran at 33 1/3 RPM, which later became the standard for long play discs. Now, this is an interesting, very early Australian talkie news. This is from my collection. I own this 35mm print, which I've had for about 30 years. And it illustrates one of the problems with sound on disc, because I had the film, but didn't have the disc. And of course, being two separate items, they can be separated very easily. And of course, record collectors are interested in discs and film collectors are interested in film. Eventually, after having this on YouTube for a number of years, a record collector came up with the matching disc for one segment of the newsreel. So here it is. I believe Norman Gantz was very well known as a radio commentator in Melbourne. There he is. That film is in the Car Museum in the Barossa Valley. And they have a copy of this film, which they claim they screen from time to time. Now, there is commentary, unfortunately. We don't have sound.
Oh. Should be working.
Now, I'm told that that is Swanson Street, Parkville.
Wow.
A little different than today. That was produced in Melbourne. I believe that only 3 of these newsreels were ever produced. 1929, sound on disc, 35mm film. The sound discs were produced by Voca Leon Records in Melbourne, or Voca Leon, whichever you say, as were other discs for other films. And there I show here, this is sound on film, where the strip down the left-hand side of the images is the soundtrack. Being on the same film, of course, it can't get out of synchronism with the image, which is a big advantage. Right, now, right here in Melbourne, we had a fellow called Frank Thring, Senior, not the later fellow. And Frank Thring was very interested in producing films. So much so that he went to the USA and came back with the best quality RCA sound on film equipment, which was thought to be available at the time. He used his first 2 initials and produced what was called FT Film Productions. They made quite a lot of films in the 1930s, many of which still exist and which are quite good, very entertaining. At Her Majesty's Theatre, I'll try and get the date, in the 25th of October 1929, a major fire occurred. And although the theatre was damaged to the point where it couldn't be used, the stage area was still in good condition. It's the stage area at Her Majesty's for the production of quite a number of his films. This film and others were later filmed at Her Majesty's Theatre in Exhibition Street. Meanwhile, in Sydney, the company called Cine Sound was set up. And it was very, very successful in producing sound films in the 1930s. In fact, Cine Sound and FT were very much rivals during that course of time. Cine Sound went about a different way of developing sound equipment. They set about adapting a silent camera to record sound, and they were quite successful. Their first effort was in 1932 with On Our Selection, a Dad and Dave film, which was enormously successful. FT, in particular, the well-known Australian comedian George George Wallace. Now, George Wallace was very well known as a vaudeville type performer, also on the radio, and he made quite a number of films. This is one of them, His Royal Highness it was called. Interestingly, when it was released in England, the name had to be changed because it was regarded as disrespectful to call him the Royal Highness. So the name of the film was changed to His Loyal Highness. Very strange. The music was loud, but the voices are not.
kids. There's been a certain amount of messing about going on here. I think that's going to cost you 20.
Yeah, sorry about the sound quality, but I can assure you it's much better than what you've heard. Okay. Now, despite having to compete against the big American companies, Australia produced a large number of films in the 1930s. Many of them were major box office hits here in Australia and in some cases overseas. FT, under the direction of Frank Thring, also produced a number of 10-minute shorts. They were released under the banner of FT Entertainers. And in many instances, they're the only vision that we have of many of the well-known at that time Australian entertainers and vaudeville stars. They were filmed in these shorts. Most of the shorts still exist today. Thanks to their popularity, they were released in large numbers. So many of them have found their way into the hands of collectors. And also the National Film and Sound Archive have, I think, every one that was produced, which is rather good. Now, this is an interesting little short. Hopefully the sound might be better. Give it a try.
Nearly 19 years ago today, I left my village home to join the Navy, the fighting Navy. And my broken-hearted mother saw me standing on the deck. She threw a kiss and then a brick which nearly broke my neck. She shouted out goodbye forever, Rudolph. I hope you'll always never think of me. And then we sailed away for miles till we reached the Sandwich Isles. Then we stopped and had some sandwiches for tea. Oh, the sea, that's the life for me, sailing over the ocean. Oh, the ocean, people call us sea dogs, but I'm more than proud to tell, I'm not only a sea dog, I'm a dirty dog as well. Dear old lioness. Now, what was that I tripped over? Let's have a look at this. Well, would you believe it? There's a little hole sticking up here. Ah, well, sailors don't care anyway. But do you know who I am? Why, I'm king of the seas. Oh, shot. Oh, right in the prime of life. Oh, right in the middle of my performance. I knew something was gonna... That was a bit of luck, and I'm not kidding you. You killed my father, you killed my mother. Revenge. That's the stuff. You know, I'll never forget there was one night my ship was laying helpless in the dock, and I was laying helpless in the dock. Oh, I'd been out having a couple of drinks with our captain, and I'll always admit if I've had a few drinks, but what that captain had been drinking. Do you know, I've never seen a fellow in such a state in all my life. Well, you can just imagine. He was standing outside the general post office, putting pennies into a letterbox and looking up at the big clock to see how much he weighed. Oh, what a state. You know, all I can remember after that, I woke up about 1/2 milk, and what a nightmare. Do you know, I dreamt I was at the gates of heaven, and St. Peter says, what do you want? I says, I want to come in. He says, who are you? I says, I'm a Scotsman. He says, well, you better go back to where you come from. We can't be bothered making porridge for one. Cheek. But then I pleaded with St. Peter. I said, oh, please, won't you give me another chance, Pete? He said, all right, I will. Now, what were you on earth, if any? I said, I was a singer. He said, all right then, sing, and I sang. If winter comes. And he told me where to go. And I went. I went straight back home to the wife. And you know, the first thing she said as I arrived there, she says, now listen, you've been a sailor for many years. Tell me, why did they call a ship a she? I said, the reason is simple. You know, a ship is just like a woman in many ways. For instance, now, most of them smoke. They're usually kept well painted. They're always connected with sails. They're fond of port and cause many a man to become a wreck, which is followed by squalls. They get into deep water. And when they're on the rocks, they give out signals of distress and finish up by clinging to a boy.
Yeah, it's not bad, 1932. Okay, well, of course we know World War II started in 1939, and that saw the virtual end of feature film production in Australia due to the wartime effort. Much of the production capacity went into producing wartime films, especially newsreels, to bring world events home to Australia. Because during the war, newsreels were the big attraction to go to the movies. No television, and the only way you could see a visual image of what was going on was by going to the movies. The war also saw production turned over to producing information films, films promoting the buying of war bonds, reducing consumption, and so on. I've got 3 short films here in sequence, which were produced during the war years, and they were specifically produced to talk about the rations, ration books, and anyway, we'll look at them.
a note of it now. On June the 5th and 6th, get your new ration books. But there are certain things to be done first. Here's a typical family. Mother, father, daughter aged 20, boy 15, boy 10, girl 6. Here's mother at the post office. She gets 4 of these cards. CR7, they call them. One for every member of the family over 14. No cards are necessary for children under 30. Merely hand in the children old ration books, and new books will be issued to you. Well, here's Mom back home. She and Dad, daughter 20 and son 15, fill in the cards, paying particular attention to occupation and the necessity to carefully read instructions on the back of the card. These properly completed are presented at the rationing centre in your town or suburb. Remember the dates, June 5th and 6th. Now, here's our family at the ration book issuing centre. Hand in old ration books, identity cards, and the CR7 cards to the issuing officer. Now watch carefully. You will receive your new ration book, your identity card returned, while the official retains the CR7 card and your old ration book. Get your CR7 card at a post office now. Read instructions carefully. Fill in card at home before you go to your rationing centre. Make sure you take with you these. Old ration book, identity card, new CR7 card, properly completed.
Make them waste their money. Make them spend. Go on. Spend all you can. Come on. It doesn't help the world if it's a bit.
Takes this girl 5 minutes to trim this girl. 5 wasted minutes for those skillful hands. Those same hands could be working for victory, sporting cartridges into a machine gun belt in the time it takes to trim a rayon slip. The National Council for Code Styling sponsors new undies in accordance with the plan for complete revision of clothing style undertaken by the Department of War Organization of Industry. Conservation of materials and labor is essential. Presided over by Mr. Timmerman, Minister for War Organization, one of the jobs of this council we've heard so much about was to help with the design of Australia's new undies so that there would be enough rayon underwear to keep Australian women supplied for the duration. Two representatives of the women of Australia on the council were Mrs. Betty Heath, fashion editress of Woman, and Mrs. Alice Jackson, editress of the Australian Women's Weekly. And now we are introduced to the new undies.
A great many women are doing important war jobs. A big percentage of those out there can't help feeling just a little bit foolish and having to wear ultra pretty undies under their uniforms, overalls, and slacks. Those girls are modeling new style undies, fashioned by leading designers to meet new conditions. Attractive, but of course, undies are cut to avoid even the tiny suggestion of bulk under our frocks. They are in line with the best cut undies that have come our way. Mother wears pajamas which conform to the new style, as does small daughter's nightie. In future, our nightgowns will be fashioned after styles like these. Pajama styles for young women. These are the new style scanties. Panties, briefs, vest, and spencer. The new undies for little girls. Do you like your new undies, dear?
Oh yes, I'm helping my dad to win the war too.
The new undies will be on sale at every underwear counter this spring. Now, do you really need to? No, of course not. Buy thoughtfully. Don't use any more coupons than you can help. These new undies save material and release skillful hands to win the war.
I don't know what we're going to do about you, young lady.
I'll show you.
There we go. I'm not really sure what that last film is intended to promote, whether it's smaller knickers or another one. I don't know. It's a very weird film. Yeah, thank you very much. There is a few copies of a small magazine that I put out for film collectors on the table. It's got a 6-page article on the Salvation Army's involvement in the film industry. If you're interested, they're free of charge. Help yourself. And I'd like to thank you. Any questions at all? Thanks, June.
Questions, comments, memories? I don't think I'll be lining up for the new one this summer.
One memory comes to mind. our family lived, I was born in 1946, and the first 10 years of my life was spent living in Fairfield. And I remember this is a war-saving street on a pole. Did you see that around Melbourne, anyone?
Yes, they're everywhere.
Yes.
They're still there.
There's probably still remnants of that around occasionally.
There certainly are.
That I haven't seen anything like that in years, since just now.
Sorry.
I was just going to say that the turntables that they used for the disc to film the jazz singer Athenaeum, we were still using in the early 50s for film.
Yep.
And they were, I heard you saying that any pump they were cloned, they were separate in a large cabinet and there was no one.
Yeah, they were very much sought after by collectors. But the tone arm that was used was Western Electric, and I remember I come from Geelong, and the old Geelong radio station, 3GL,
Yeah.
they had one there which they used for years and years as a transcription on the transcription discs. Now, in those days, before tape recorders and so on, they used to get their radio serials would come down from Sydney on a disc. And the disc they used these long tone arms to play it back. But interestingly, the disc would start on the outer edge at the beginning, and when it got to the centre, it was about halfway through, so they'd run an advertisement and they'd turn it over, and then they'd start again from the centre on the second side. But the reason for it was because the quality was much better, the quality of the sound was much better at the faster rate on the outer edge of the disc. So those tone arms are very much sought after, and I think many of them got one way or the other disappeared from many of the early theatres. The turntables are very hard to come by. I at one stage had a Western Electric sound on disc system, everything except the turntable. So, and of course, without the turntable, it's useless because it's driven by the same motor that drives the film mechanism, so it stays in synchronism. So you couldn't just use another turntable and hope for the best. It didn't work.
Back, where that?
You mentioned that the Salvation Army had tiles or film panels that they presented with their the film about Christ, well, their presentation about Christ, and you put up a picture of it, and it looked like it was in colour. How did they make that? Because that was in the early 20s, wasn't it?
You mean those slides in colour?
Yes.
Yeah, they were hand painted and hand coloured.
Okay.
As were a lot of the advertising slides used in the film theatres, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, right up to the 60s. They still had glass slides which they would put on before the film, advertising usually local businesses or cars or something like that. And most of those were also hand coloured. So some very talented people, mainly ladies, were involved in the colouring of those slides.
So they were just single slides.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
I saw the photo of the radiophone factory, Mike. I remember as a child in Adelaide, in the suburb of Glenside, it had to be before 1952 because the trams were still running. There was a little shop front factory that I was told made film equipment, and I got just a gut feel that it might have been sound related. Do you know if there was any organisation that might have applied to?
Well, Adelaide had two major manufacturers of projection equipment. Garvey was one, and I can't think of the other, but someone here probably knows.
Fittings or Benbow?
Benbow, yeah. They were widely used in South Australia, and all very good quality apparently. I've never seen one, but I'm told they were extremely good. So they may have been what you've seen.
Mike, I'm amazed at some of that stuff has survived from the 1800s, and to see it is amazing. So we've had that, and then movie theatre, sorry, movies. And then we had, of course, television. And then videos, and now we're into streaming services. So we still like a moving image and so on. People still go to the movies, still go to the cinemas.
Mhm.
Why do you think that is? It's not, they're not dead like everyone predicted maybe 20 years ago.
Well, I think theatres have changed their way of doing business. Firstly, the large auditorium in most cases no longer exists, except perhaps for the Astor and a few that have really managed to survive. They've all gone into smaller theatres, converted them into perhaps a sixplex. Of course, they only hold about 20 to 50 people, which means they can have 6 different films on. They don't have to fill the place up. They don't have to have a big audience for each film. The other thing we're finding at the moment, we're only talking about this a week or so ago, is that many of the theatres now are really semi-restaurants with pictures on the screen as a secondary attraction. You go along to FOMO, FOMO, stands for Food and Movies. You go to even the Gold Class at Village or any of those. For somebody who really wants to watch a movie, they're a jolly nuisance because you've got people there with the phone lit up and they're ordering food and everything else, and then the waitress comes around and blocks your view. But it seems to be the way it's going, and it's certainly getting people back in.
Yes.
And that's what's required to keep the industry going. The other thing that, from a personal point of view, I find that many of the films released today, I have no interest in at all. I don't like animated films because they're all computer generated, and you can tell that they're not the Disney type animation. And also the, what do we call them? Superhero films, the Marvels and all those leave me cold. So it's very difficult to find something that suits people in the older age group, I find.
Well, also, a lot of films seem to be developed and made available through the various streaming services, the Amazon Prime and Paramount and all these, but they don't ever hit, for example, the big screen or an ABC, SBS commercial television. And so unless you've got all these subscriptions, you don't get to see some of the newest movies that are out with all the people that we know as stars, if you like. And I think that's really difficult for people.
It certainly is. I think a lot of people would like to watch some of the older movies, some of the classics that are around, the Humphrey Bogarts, Elizabeth Taylors and so on, which were really quite good films, but you can't get to see them these days unless you go and buy a DVD. Even the streaming services are reluctant to put anything that's in black and white on because people don't like black and white. And also the commercial stations, if it's not in widescreen, which would leave black at the sides, they're generally not interested either unless it's midnight, and they might put something like that on. I find that we're watching a great deal of SBS on demand. I like European films. I don't mind subtitles one bit. And there's so many great series and films available there, and that fills our need.
So maybe food.
Well, there's something else called Open Culture that is similar to SBS On Demand. And they have old art films, and I like black and white, and I like conversation, and I like not boom, boom, pow, pow, cruelties all the time. So I grew up without TV, and I grew up only seeing maybe one film a year. So we're out in the country. So it suits me to be able to concentrate on the conversation and enjoy the story. And the Astor used to have a lot of the old movies.
Yes.
And they do it double. That was the trick, wasn't it? But I know they changed administration and different things happened. So I'm trying to be more.
Just a bit of a plug for those who like silent movies with a live orchestra. Fed Square tomorrow and Thursday night are doing free performances. Tomorrow's Lost World. And so they're doing a live silent film with a live orchestra. Fed Square in the city.
Buster Keaton's on.
Buster Keaton is on Thursday, and they're all free. So they're obviously trying to open that sort of audience up to the new generations who may not have seen these before. So I think it's a great initiative.
You can also get some of them through Canopy, which a lot of libraries subscribe to. We don't because it's not specific enough for us, but their range is reasonable with some of the older stuff too.
But yeah, it's also a genuine problem for libraries with all the streaming services. Like Disney's just stopped putting everything out on DVD, which means libraries physically can't collect and then make them available to people that can't afford Disney Plus. And Disney's done it quite deliberately because they don't make money out of it. So we've got a pretty good Australian movie collection here, which can be viewed on DVD, Blu-ray, or in the library. We have it on our server too. So we've got just clicked over to 1.2 terabytes of films. If anyone wants to come and watch Australian movies.
Great.
And television shows.
I'm thinking about that train coming and people fleeing the theatre. I remember the first time I went to an IMAX. It was people that was flying or walking, but it came to a cliff. I was going to be ill because it just kept going. It was just right there. It was very frightening.
And it's fun at IMAX watching the Butterfly film. You don't watch the film, you watch the people. Because the Butterfly film was in 3D and they look like they're coming at you and there's people.
Yes.
Just answered your own question of why people still go to the cinema, because of that experience. And there's also the crowd emotion. If you sit in the cinema and watch a film by yourself, you do not get the same experience as if you're in a theatre of full.
Yeah, very, very big factor.
Yeah.
I remember a movie some time ago called The Bank.
Yes.
Maybe 20 years or so ago.
We have it on Blu-ray.
And at the end of it, because everyone hates banks, probably most people in this room hate banks, but at the end of it, the audience clapped and cheered and carried on no end because it was a good
And
ending
that's
for
the
the novel.
experience. Yes.
Yeah.
And you've had a good night out.
Yes.
That happens in almost all the Melbourne Film Festival films as well. The audience applauds at the end.
Yes, yeah. I'll pause up. Thank you so much, Mike. Very entertaining, very engaging. Put a lot of effort into that, and we just love those excerpts from the collection. CATHS is just around the corner here, so you can visit anytime. Pick up the literature there. There's tons more lolly bags and popcorn and stuff down the back if you want to take some home. Thank you to Ellen and Lauren for organising today. If you've not had contact with us before and you'd like to hear more about what we do, daytime and evening events, leave your details with Lauren at the back there and help yourself to snacks again. We hope to see you again soon. Thank you, Mike.